So now let's talk about bringing the science back. So planning, designing, and implementing it. I think a key component to this, just from a business owner's perspective, would be to make sure that all the individual components are accounted for and managed, that I have centralization, and up front in that planning and designing, that I want to make sure that I have all the information related to every single aspect. Because if someone says, oh, it costs X, and then it's like, okay, that's approved, and then at the end of it you find out, well, that's X for potentially VDI.
Yep.
You didn't ask me how much the network was going to have to grow in order to accomplish it. I want to know, okay, if we're going from where we are right now to this solution, what are all the changes that are going to take place? Okay, what are the costs associated with all the changes, and what are the benefits associated with either an uptick in costs, which I'm fine with if there's value to it, or if it's going to cut costs. I want to know at a future point that, okay, now verify that savings occurred, and I want to see an analysis on that from an accountability standpoint. So how would an organization go about doing that?
So there's a lot of calculators that are available that are out there. There's a huge difference between what they can actually do and can't do. So it's important to actually, to your point, bringing back the science, make sure all your variables are included. We have really advanced calculators, and we're not the only ones that have these advanced calculators. There are a lot of folks that do. But ultimately, making sure you're quantifying all of the variables that are important. Administrative tasks that go behind licensing, and administrative tasks that go behind everything from ordering fiber to ordering connections. There's lots to be included within this total cost of ownership. Right?
Sure.
The problem generally is, A, with the refresh cycle, B, with teams and information that's consistently being ordered, spread apart. It's very hard for someone to lock down what their existing costs are. Desktops have been around since forever, and were one of the first pieces of technology. Almost every, and I say that in...
I can tell you're a lot younger than I am. Desktops have been there forever.
Have been there forever as far as that technology curve is concerned, right? So this was one of the first assets that we brought in. This is the way we manage this asset, the way we control this asset. The best practice has been written on this for, again, using the term lightly, forever since technology hit our desktops.
It's
right?
mature 20th century.
Right.
Mature.
Matured. So the reality is that this is, a lot of people feel when it's not broken, don't fix it, right? There's nothing broken about rolling out desktops. Does that mean that it's not more expensive than it should be? No. Does that mean that it's not more complicated than it really should be? No, it just means it works, right? So you repeat the process. It's oftentimes within those things that we just do based on a habit so fast, they can actually be the most cost effective for us by actually looking at things that are inherited responsibilities and more difficult responsibilities. Simple administrative tasks now cost more time than if it was automated. So if I asked you for a rundown of what your laptop or what your PC, personal computer rollout program is right now, you'd have to go talk to your IT guy, you'd have to talk to your financial team, you'd have to talk to the person who are managing all the licenses and the internet. Put that story together is somewhat of a different thing. Realistically, part A might change while you're fishing the information for part C, and part D might change. So it's a very difficult thing to put all together when it has so much dissimilarity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you bring in that whole VDI perspective, it actually allows you to start capturing and then consecutively monitoring that cost. So once you do this effort, it's repeatable, and you can then look at how much your spend is on a regular basis from the cloud. You can then look at how many licenses you actively have running at any given moment. You can start to quantify those things that normally take us a ton of time just to come up with a story once. You can start to actually reel them in and have accountability for them forever. So think of how powerful it would be of a story to go to any CTO or CIO out there in the industry and go, what is your desktop cost? And they click a button and they go, well, per user right now I'm spending $17, per desktop I'm spending $87, adding on the fact that I have remote users, those remote users are actually costing me $122. To actually be able to give you that information would be amazing, right? And that's how that cloud helps.
Let me ask you a question regarding those calculators. Do those calculators take into account future expenses that really are unknown at this point?
So Yes, there are always an assumption of how much it might cost for a
Right,
future
a might.
X, but it's a might, because some things are scaling up and some things are scaling down. So the cost of the processors, the cost of memory, the cost of the newest type of memory processor, drive or input device, those are always going through the roof, right? Constantly. The reality is that if you move into that virtualized space, it's a race to zero as opposed to the race to the other side of the fence. So cloud-based resources have been scaling down 36% year after year after year, and it's actually some reports show larger numbers than that. But that's always going down. The other side of the fence, the physical asset, the physical side of it, is tickering up and tickering down and tickering up and tickering down and tickering up. And they're realizing the physical asset has to have some type of boundary. But if you remember, our costs of PCs have gone from thousands and thousands and thousands down to hundreds, back up to thousands. There's such a in-between with it, whereas the cloud is consistently trending downwards. And so you can kind of reverse the polarity on that inconsistency, right?
Do these calculators also take into consideration labor?
Some of them do, and that's why I was saying it's important to have the right one, right? So it's not just labor, it's labor all around. It's labor on how many tickets do you actually have that you handle on a regular basis, right? You first roll out a new technology or platform, you get a lot of tickets on it, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of people not positive that it's gonna work out. Once it melds itself out and it gets actively running, you then see a normal amount of tickets. So I would say for an organization that has 100 employees, I would expect to see probably five to 10 tickets per month on a PC or a laptop device, right? On a physical device. On a virtualized device, the ability to troubleshoot that is instantaneous. Whereas on a PC, I gotta wait for Bob to come back, right? So depending on your business, that can be very impactful. If you have doctors traveling overseas, if you've got sales representatives that are making an entire trip around the country and to come back, you're waiting for them to get back. Then you have shipping costs. How many of those tickets actually require someone to ship an asset back to you? Is that cost included? Do you have to deploy that asset out to users that are in the field? Is that cost accounted for? When the employee leaves, if they're a remote employee, they have to send that hardware back to you. Is that cost? So there's lots of little costs that oftentimes a calculator won't show you or won't ask you the question of, which means it's incomplete, right? So then that kind of brings us full circle to, this has been around. The process behind refreshing a personal computer is very much thought out and done. But we don't account for a lot of the cost that goes behind it, unfortunately. We just eat it. It's erosive to the bottom line.
Let's talk about centralization, because a couple of things hit me when you said that. First thing is inventorying, planning and designing, taking into account what the long-term strategic goals are huge.
Huge.
Okay, so from an end user standpoint, that's where the time needs to be spent, because if that's done, the information that you're making your decisions on are going to be accurate and inclusive of all of the potential costs associated with it. And then two, centralization can help you stage, because what I caught in there is, instead of kind of potentially doing refreshes and dealing with a disparate environment, you can set up and say, okay, these are the different environments that we're going to pre-stage. You have access to A, B, C, and D. That'll take care of sales, marketing, and all the different divisions in here. We'll set that up. We'll do it once, and then everyone, in essence, from an orchestration standpoint, will be able to pick and choose, so that if we spend this time up front, then in an individual manager, it's easy for them to implement, and then those IT resources can be used for production and everything else. But if it's not done up front, to me, it's got the potential to be kludgy and a train wreck.
Absolutely. Role-based access control, right? Based on the fact that Bob has a new employee coming in, his process is to contact IT to look at what new hardware he wants, to actually approve whether that hardware matches what his new employee is going to want. It's a runaround. Whereas if we were able to do it within a cloud-based portal, Bob's employee or Bob himself could go and check the box that this is the exact item that should be deployed for his user. it is deployed the minute that that person comes in, they log on, they see it, they get it, they have access to it, boom, they're done, right? Or from home, they can use their own PC or their iPad or whatever the device is that they want to access from.
And conversely, I would imagine if that employee leaves, uncheck, done.
Exactly. There's also retention. So a lot of that, I just personally had someone who outside of the organization lost their laptop. We were getting ready to do a big show. One of their presentations that we were working on, gone. So that person is now in the hole. Did they think that they had to have PC backup in today's world running to make sure that their data was replicated? No, right? And I mean, we'd look to it and we'd say, hey, how many organizations actually have a PC backup policy today? Most of them, again, would be negligent in this entire space, right? Because how often do your hard drives, today's hard drives, really crash? Pretty infrequently, right? So we depend now on the technology solving our problem when the reality is it doesn't solve the problem, it just prolongs it. It gives us an extended life. That's almost worse, right? If I have a laptop that's got 3 years worth of my data on it and then it crashes, then I'm really in trouble, right? So that's where, again, we're choosing ignorance as opposed to enforcing something that solves our problem. If I had a backup of all of the data that was created by my employees throughout the course of their working for me, I could know that during that time of transition that they're getting ready to leave on me, whether they're moving to a new job or whether they're retiring or whatever the reasoning being, once they're moving on, I have to do a huge transition with them. I have to make sure, did you copy down you copied your calendar, did you give me everything that you have off that are you sure it's good? Because it's going to IT, they're going to format it, refresh it. Everything that we've worked on over these 3 years, I've got to get from you. I'm desperate. It's got to be an important transition. When the reality is I should have a backup of it. And if I need the data, I can query it, much like I query my email or any other folder structure today, right? So once, to your point in the beginning of this, once we start to standardize, we can start creating those controls. We can start providing file share locations so people have to share specific spaces, right? Always being connected. Those spaces are constant. If I say, John, on this laptop, share to your local share, and then you go home and you don't connect, is that local share always there? No. So you might end up sharing to your local machine. Right. You've now broken your own policy, right? Just for convenience. You can truly control that in a VDI environment. And that's kind of the importance. These things that we've left behind, whether it be security on your password policies, whether it be antivirus securities, whether it be standard things that we want to have a global policy to apply. Once you go virtual, you can actually transform the technology right then and there and take advantage of those policies, those things that you need to have in place.
Is there a downside or a consideration involved when one is deploying VDI? How long does it take?
Yeah, so it's really dependent on how many different images you have, right? Let's say, you've got, again, to the groups, the breakdown that you were making before, you got 40 different groups, 40 different internal departments. For each department, they might have their own workload specific. You have to build that within your VDI environment. Now, if it's already built within a virtualized environment in-house, we can emulate that or copy that out to the cloud-based environment. So really the most work comes in building out that portfolio for the first time, setting those roles. Because if you take it one step further, you now can say, Bob, I'm managing your costs. You're only allowed to deploy $300 worth of VDI resources. And when you hit that flag, you're going to be alerted. As opposed to the fire drill of, I've got a new guy starting or a new girl starting on Wednesday. I've got to get this PC sign off on it. And you're, okay, all right, let's get the business rolling.
Got it.
So those controls, those access through the assessment, going into the design phase, going into the implementation phase, reusing that thought, reusing that logic and that policy and applying it now so that you can control everything. Shut out parking. You can park these images if you want to, right? So you can say, hey, look, I have a development team coming in to do .NET development. I want them to have 12 VDI boxes. They're all pre-staged, ready to go. They come in. All of a sudden, the work is done a week and a half early. They're going to leave. You're going to bring them back 3 months from now, and in 3 months, you want them to have access to the same systems. You can power them down, park those images, not use them, and then the minute they come back, refire them up, right? And it doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of disk cost to have them actually just shut down. So you can start to control those assets and their spend, which is a very powerful concept.
So in closing, we spoke about a lot today. Like, in a nutshell, what are kind of the key benefits of VDI versus, in essence, doing it yourself?
I think ultimately the centralization of your support, right? The centralization of and the standardization is a huge cost savings to your IT team, which I'm pretty sure is already going to be stretched beyond what their capacity actually is. So you're relieving one of the biggest burdens. So that's the first piece. I think the next step of it really is being able to take some of that security and control back into your power, right? And that's important to really embrace that characteristic, whether it's controlling your intellectual property or finally standardizing on a configuration that needs to be made that hasn't been made yet. I think that it also gives you an ability to start to unify that whole workforce, right? To start to unify the tools that they're using, the instant messaging that they're using, the components that are being deployed down to their desktop experience. Remember, the big portion of taking a PC off of the desk and putting it into a mobile capability is to enable a mobile user. Our definition of what a mobile user is today is vastly different than it ever has been, right? A mobile user, and we've discussed this before, can be somebody going on their lunch break, can be somebody that has to ride the subway for the next 45 minutes, right? That mobile user still having access and still being able to work and keeping their productivity going is extremely important. And so, again, this kind of gives that affordability or flexibility to a mobile workforce. And then I think the final characteristic really ultimately would be in going through refreshes or managing those assets, it's hugely simplified, right? For myself and in the measurements we've done, 80% of data input is good. 20% is wrong. And so, at the end of the day, if you have to maintain 50 different points, whether it's licenses and communication and asset numbers and all these other factors, throughout the course of a refresh, there's a chance of 20% of that being wrong. And so simplify that refresh process. Moreover, with the operating systems and other components changing so often and drastically, it gives you a great point to be able to run proofs of concepts right in the same space that you're running your current environments. So there's a brand new operating system just came out for Windows. Let's say I wanted to give that to my CEO, John, and see how it's working. Can I just erase his laptop and give him a new operating system? No. What if it kills him? What if it bottlenecks him? So having a VDI workstation, I can say, hey, John, half the day I'd like you to work from your new Windows version, and the other half the day, if it doesn't work, go back to your other one. They're sitting side by side. So it gives us more flexibility to actually be able to take control and maintain that relationship, I guess, with the end user.
Great. So for that long-term benefit, what we're really saying from a business perspective is you need to spend the time up front to understand what you have, to understand what the cost is across the board with the implementation of VDI, and that's critically important up front. Spend the time up front so that long-term you have centralization, reporting, and simplicity, and cost savings.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
all right?
Perfect.
Great. Enjoy the rest of your summer.